great to have this opportunity. Thank you. Ryan, I appreciated your talk a lot, and what you were saying about EQ. Yes, you did. And what you're saying about EQ in particular, I think, is a great segue into what I'd like to spend my time talking about. And you may be asking the question that whenever anyone stands up in front of you, you always ask, why am I here? Why is this person here? And if you read my bio and saw that I'm a pastor, then you may be also saying, why are you here listening to a pastor? In fact, my first interaction I had with a neighbor when I moved to Oakland 11 years ago, he asked me what I did, the dreaded question, and I said, well, I'm a Presbyterian minister. And he said, are you shitting me? And I said, no, actually I am. And he said, well, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. So I don't know what that meant, but I had a first grader in my congregation just this last Sunday bring me up their handout, which we give to a lot of our kids in our church, with 3 questions on it. And the 3 questions were, why are church buildings so big? Why do microphones make your voice so loud? And why are pastors not normal people? So you have to listen to a pastor for the next 15 minutes. I will say that my vocation does have its perks. If you are working really hard on an airplane and you don't want to talk to the chatty Kathy that is sitting next to you, you cannot do what I can do, which is to say, when they ask me what I do, I'm an ambassador of the Lord Jesus Christ, because that shuts up all conversation at that point, and I just carry on with what I'm doing. But I do need to give you just a little bit of my bona fides. I think Bambi has had me share at 3 or 4 of these, because I actually did start Christ Church, which is one church of 3 locations, in 2006 here in the Bay Area. And then in 2007, we started a nonprofit called Project Peace. So I've had a lot of experience in the startup culture, both starting these 2 entities, but also our church is full of entrepreneurs. So I love the opportunity of sharing a room with entrepreneurs and talking about really matters of EQ, for lack of a better way of describing it. So what I love about you as an entrepreneur, an aspiring entrepreneur, is you're self-driven, you're a free thinker, you're innovative, you're creative. I love that many of you have a deep desire and a relenting passion to pursue that idea that you really feel called to pursue. And then you put your sweat and your work into your idea, and I might call this, in the beginning stages, the ride of your life. And you enter into this startup, and it's the ride of your life, but what can often happen along the way is you begin to kind of push down and hold back your emotions. And our emotions are actually crucial thermostats when it comes to how do we know ourselves and how do we know others. And so what happens is you begin to create this outside perception, but then as you move forward into this inside reality, you keep creating the outside perception, you keep feeling this inside reality, you keep creating the outside perception, you keep feeling this inside reality, and your investors and your employees and your customers and your friends and your family and yourself start experiencing one part of you, which is not really you. And so what I want to focus on, if there's a thesis here or a thread I want to tease out in the next few minutes, it's this one. You must address the inside reality so that you can healthily relate to yourself and then appropriately relate to others. You must address the inside reality so you can healthily relate to yourself and then appropriately relate to others. So I am talking about your emotions. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, I'm a huge fan. The 5 emotions displayed there, many experts, when they've distilled the kind of the seminal emotions, have usually landed on 5 to 10. 5 of them that show up in this movie are fear, disgust, sadness, anger, and joy. Paul Ekman is the psychologist that's underneath this, should you be interested. But I think what I would like to do is actually take our discussion in our remaining moments below the, I'm in your way, I've just discovered, below the presenting emotions, which are the simple ones to understand, to more complex emotions that can be easily dismissed, but they're often underlying these things. So I want to just look at 4. We're not going to look at disgust, but I want to look at fear. If you've seen the movie, one of Fear's comments is, all right, we did not die today. I'll call that unqualified success. But when it comes to your role as an entrepreneur in a startup, I think what is really underneath that fear is often this deep sense of anxiety. I would describe it as being the skinny kid in a wrestling ring in a college wrestling match. And what happens with this anxiety is too scary to admit to others, and you start feeling very small in it. And I would think about it this way. This would be as good a time as any to recommend a book to you called Emotional Equations by Chip Conley. Some of you will know that work. He's an entrepreneur himself. He actually draws from Dante, believe it or not, and his work on the 7 deadly sins in the Inferno. But he begins to put some equation to some of these emotions we may be experiencing. And he thinks about anxiety this way. He says it's uncertainty times powerlessness. So when I think about that in my own life, I think about it this way. It's what I don't know multiplied by what I can't control. And that's not a sum game, it's a multiplication game, because the more you don't know and the more you can't control, the more you feel this complex emotion of anxiety. And something that's been helpful for me and others as I've kind of walked through this in my own startup story is this little chart here. It's just taking out a simple piece of paper, and apparently these slides will be posted, but it's asking on the left-hand column, what is it that I know? What is it that I don't know? What is it that I can influence? And what is it that I cannot control? Just putting words on page there as you deal with this complex emotion called anxiety is crucial. The second one I want to look at of the 4 is sadness. So if you've seen Inside Out, you hear this character say, "I'm too sad to walk, just give me a few hours." Underneath that sadness, I think, is something much more complex. It's disappointment. And there was an interesting psychological study done in the 1990s where they studied people's engagement with the 13 most unpleasant emotions. And by a factor of 2, disappointment reigned supreme as the most unpleasurable emotion to experience. And of course, it wouldn't surprise us that we score highest in disappointment in the U of middle age, or if you're an entrepreneur, you're multiplied by dog years. So probably in your year 2 or year 3 when it comes to your startup. And when I think about disappointment, I think about an equation for it this way. This is the way I would write it. It's what I hoped to accomplish minus what I did accomplish. And the gap there is disappointment. So it's the unicorn you want to be and the Shetland pony that you feel like you are, and the disappointment that you somehow have to process along the way. And what I have found helpful for myself and other entrepreneurs that I've had exposure to is putting this chart on a piece of paper and asking myself on the left, what pleasures do I feel like I demand? And then on the right, for what am I thankful? Because believe it or not, I think disappointment is actually connected to our sense of gratification or gratitude. And when I sort of unpack all of the pleasures that I might not experience as attainable on the one side, and then I sort of, if I may, proverbial count my blessings on the other side, I really begin to see that the disappointment is not always as severe as I might have thought that it was. The third thing I'd like to look at, emotionally speaking, is anger. You'll remember this, Lewis Black in Inside Out. Congratulations, San Francisco, you found a way to ruin pizza. And it was the broccoli pizza, if you may recall. But I think if we get underneath anger, and this may be the hard one for you, it certainly is for me, I think we might find a more complex emotion, and it's envy. So in the Greek times, this is where the expression arose, you are green with envy, which is to suggest you are actually overproducing bile, or in our vernacular, you are full of shit, okay? So to be green with envy is essentially to live out of this equation. It's to find your rival, it's to watch your rival succeeding at what you wanted to succeed in. And watching that happen is usually when envy begins to percolate and breed and multiply in our heart. Bertrand Russell said it this way. He said, if you desire glory, you may envy Napoleon, but Napoleon envied Caesar, Caesar envied Alexander, and Alexander, I dare say, envied Hercules, who never existed. And what I've found helpful, and this is a little bit of a thought experiment, is kind of playing the zero-sum game where we kind of work against the assumption that life is not a zero-sum. And we start imagining that rival who has succeeded in the way that we wanted to succeed, receiving this great reward or award for the fruit of his or her labor. And you watch her in your mind's eye come up to the podium, accept the award, and then you begin to feel what he or she may be experiencing in that moment: deep fulfillment, deep satisfaction, joy and happiness. And if you'll allow yourself to go there with your rival, believe it or not, it actually engenders a degree of empathy for that person, because you begin to say, oh yeah, so I could see how they may feel in life the way that I feel in life. So lastly, joy. I'm actually going to work backwards or antithetically to joy. Joy in Inside Out says, aren't we happy? Who's having fun? Underneath it, I'm actually going to put the word workaholism, because if you're like me, and a lot of us in the Bay Area live like this, we tend to seek to attach our life's greatest pleasure or joy to the work that we're doing. So some questions to think about, and these get posted later. Do you often neglect family, friends, your health, and other important elements of your life because you get so wrapped up in your work? If you were to create a pie chart of your sense of esteem and confidence as a person, what percentage of that pie would come from your work as opposed to the rest of your life? A couple more. At social gatherings with non-work-related people, what percentage of your time do you end up talking about work? Or are you good at making excuses for why you have to work so hard? I bring these things up primarily because I would like to see you get in the habit of routinely emptying out your emotional jug, I've heard it said. I have a commute on my bike from my workplace to our home, and the end of the commute is a hill, and I often stop at the bottom of the hill, get off my bike, push it up the hill because I'm tired, but also to do the exercise of saying, you know, what is it today that's making me angry? What is it today that I've been afraid of? What am I feeling sad about? What am I feeling joy over? Or to get a bit more complex, you know, where am I finding deep disappointment? What's making me really anxious? I'm watching my time, so in my last couple moments, let me say the real reason I'm giving this talk to you is I have an ulterior motive. And the ulterior motive is to proselytize you. No, it's not that at all. The ulterior motive is I live in the Bay Area, and you live in the Bay Area, most of you, and I am deeply convinced that if you are a better person, then you will create a healthier culture in your startup and in your organization, and through that, you'll actually seed common good from the very beginning. And so as you think about being a better person, I think you need to pay attention to your emotions as a thermostat that is forever giving you a read on how you're doing in relationship with yourself, how you're doing in relationship with your family, your friends, coworkers. And I think that emotional jug thing may need to be for you, if a daily process, a weekly process. It's putting a date on the calendar from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Friday afternoon and doing some journaling. It's seeing a therapist or a life coach, which was alluded to earlier. I thought Ryan's point was well taken, that we spend a lot of time developing our management team and our board team, but not our personal team. I think if you're able to do that, then secondly, when you build this culture, because you as the entrepreneur, at least for the first 2 or 3 years, you're creating the culture of your startup. It is an ecosystem that you've created, and you are the watershed. So there's either going to be toxicity flowing into it, or there's going to be health flowing into it. That's going to start with how you are appropriately addressing your emotions. But then thirdly, I think for all of us, it will build common good. You'll be able to seed common good and social health from the very beginning of your startup. So I would conclude with one biblical allusion to this. There's this book in the Old Testament. It's the book of Ruth. It's in the Hebrew scriptures. And if you know anything about the story, Ruth would glean from the fields. And one of the prescriptions, the laws of the land, was that you needed to leave 10% of the crop on the exterior parts of the field, leave it there. So when you were gleaning from that field, that 10% was left over to whomever may come and glean. The poor, widows, the disenfranchised. And I feel like as we think about seeding common good into our startup, there's a lot of ways of thinking about leaving that extra 10%. For some of you, that might be a monetary thing. I just yesterday learned of an organization that is mentoring those that have been formerly incarcerated and getting them placed into living wage jobs. Some of you may be thinking in your staffing structure, I can give 10% of my staff to that. Whatever it may be a better person so that you create a healthier culture so that you can seed common good from the beginning. And I did that in 17 minutes. I beat my time. So thank you.